Hey everyone, so we've been talking about how history confirms the Bible and how time and again the gospel writers show that they know their stuff and are trustworthy. Today, I want to hone in on a passage that at first glance looks like a big goof on Luke and John's part. Luke 3, 1-2 talks about the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, which might sound weird at first because it seems like both were high priests at the same time. John seems to make the same goof using the same names. In John 18:19, he refers to the high priest, which must be Annas since John says Jesus was taken to him first in 18:13, and in 18:24 he mentions Annas sending Jesus to Caiaphas. But then in 18:24 he calls Caiaphas the high priest. In John 11:49 and 18:13 he says Caiaphas was the high priest that year, making it sound like the role could change from year to year. This can be confusing since verses like Numbers 35:25 and Joshua 26 suggests that the high priest role was for life. So Luke and John mentioning multiple living high priests at once and using phrases like the high priest that year might come off then less than perfect accuracy, maybe even errors. As you might expect, skeptics have had a field day with this. The 19th century skeptic Robert Taylor ridiculed these verses in both Gospels as examples of the falsehood of gospel statistics. He claimed that, quote, any person acquainted with the history and polity of the Jews must have known that there was never but one high priest at a time, any more than among ourselves there is never but one Archbishop of Canterbury, and that no Jew could have been ignorant that the high priest's office was not annual but for life. But the gospel authors actually know what's up better than the critics. We learn from the Jewish historian Josephus that Romans understood the high priest position was politically powerful, and under their rule, it became as much about politics as it was about religion. They felt free to switch up the high priest as they pleased, though they aimed to pick people with some claim to the role and who weren't too despised by the public. Sometimes they even made changes quickly within a very short time frame. Around the time of Jesus, Caiaphas had been in the high priest role for a while, and his father-in-law, Annas, who John 18 mentions, was still kicking around after being ousted by the Romans. But Caiaphas didn't stick around much longer either. The Romans replaced him in 36 AD. John's phrase, high priest that year, is probably pointing to how Romans sometimes switched up the high priest role, hinting that just a few years later, Caiaphas was also out of the picture too. The fact that Annas was a big deal as an influential high priest, confirmed by other sources, and was related to Caiaphas through family ties, could explain how he held some sway at the time of Jesus, almost acting as a joint high priest alongside Caiaphas. So in a nutshell, Josephus and the Gospels drop some intriguing breadcrumbs. It seems that after Annas got the boot from his high priest gig by Pilate's predecessor, Valerius Gratus, the Jews still recognized him as the legit high priest, not really appreciating the Roman interference. But wait, there's a little bit more here. Joseph Lightfoot, a 19th century scholar and bishop, backed the historical accuracy of the Gospel in John and noticed a passage in Josephus that uses the terms high priest and high priest in a similar way to how Luke and John do. Josephus says, "But he, Quadratus, sent two others of those who were of the greatest power among men, and both Jonathan and Ananias the high priests." So in the 60s, the Romans were at it again, swapping out the high priest position multiple times. Ananias, the former high priest, probably the guy running the show at the not-so-friendly hearing of the Apostle Paul in Acts 23 that we discussed in another video, was still a big deal, even though the Romans had appointed a new high priest named Joshua. Anywho, according to Josephus, Ananias greased the palms of the newer high priest and let his own crew roll up like gang enforcers, looting the threshing floors, holding ties meant for the priest. This left some of the poorer priests struggling to get by. Josephus uses the term high priest for both Ananias and Joshua, just like Luke and John do for Annas and Caiaphas. So Luke and John gives us multiple examples of high priests being used for more than one living dude. And Josephus backs it up with confirmation from outside the Bible that, yep, that's how people in the time were using the term high priests. So the critics are just plain wrong here. This is just another example of how history backs the Bible. I'll have even more examples in future videos, so be sure to subscribe and also check out the playlist if you're new and want to get up to speed. Thanks for watching.